Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I have addressed this particular aspect several times. The issue of, yes, Chamisa lied, so what? Zanu PF has lied lots and lots of times. Let's move on. Let's focus on Zanu PF. This can only be said by somebody who clearly doesn't understand what we are talking about here. Chamisa lying about plugging vote rigging loopholes and calling people to participate in flawed elections has got far-reaching consequences than Mnangagwa lying that there will be free education next year. People have to understand where we are as a nation. If you don't understand that, then of course, you treat the two lies as if they're equal and of no consequence. The two are not. Let me explain again. By the late 1990s, the people of Zimbabwe realized that Zanu PF was a party of thugs, hell-bent on turning Zimbabwe into a de facto one-party state, and that they will rule. That is where we're starting. By the late 1990s, people realized that Zimbabwe's economy was in decline. And as long as Zanu PF remained in power, that decline would continue. What is more, by then, people realized that Zanu PF would rather burn the whole country down than give up power. The people had learned from the Gukura Wundi. I have said on this platform, and I'll say it again, the primary purpose of Gukura Wundi was to force the only other political party that constituted a serious challenge to Zanu PF hegemony, rule, i.e. PF Sapo, was to force them to give up their existence as an independent party and force them to join Zanu PF. That was the primary purpose of Gukura Wundi. And Mugabe and his cronies demonstrated that they were prepared to burn the whole country down to impose the de facto one-party state. And by the time the late Joshua Ngomo agreed to give up PF Sapo and signed the Unity Accord in 1987, over 20,000 Sapo supporters and leaders had been murdered. And for those who doubt Zanu PF's intention, you only have to look at what happened in 2008, when Zanu PF's hold on power faced its most serious threat to debt. The 2008 electoral coup was about Zanu PF reasserting its hold on power. Pure and simple. Here is Dr. Ibo Mandaza giving an account of that.
I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat on 2008. He phoned Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, look, I lost election and I concede defeat. And I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns. I was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, you stay where you are. And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away. No? And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat these people like that? He was a broken man. So there's no doubt at all here in South Africa as to the brutality of the regime in Harare. So it amazes me, it angers me, in fact, when I also know that Mugabe...
Well, that is the tragedy. We had in Zanu PF a regime that was determined to stay in power at all costs. That is the reality. So by the late 1990s, the people of Zimbabwe were under no illusion that, one, we have a regime that was dragging the nation deeper and deeper into the economic abyss. Two, that as long as that regime continues to exercise tyrannical powers, the country was stuck with them. As long as Zanu PF is able to rig the elections and stay in power, the regime will stay in power, and the economic decline will continue. Three, the nation was under no illusion that Zanu PF was never going to reform itself out of office. It had established the dictatorship. It was never going to dismantle it. So those were the three realities that the nation faced by the late 1990s. The question was what to do about it. The idea that the nation should just give up and let the road continue was unthinkable. And so the question comes back again, if it's unthinkable, then what can we do? Well, there were two options. Either the nation took up arms to fight the regime, just as we had taken up arms to fight the white colonial regime, or the nation must elect opposition leaders who will implement the democratic changes necessary to end the dictatorship. The country still had, at least in principle, elections, and could use that to elect opposition leaders whose primary task would be to implement the democratic changes to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. The people knew that Zanu PF would not take kindly to that, but they were prepared to risk everything. And they have risked everything. Livelihoods, limbs, and many people have died. So we come back to focusing on MDC-CCC. What is it that the nation expected of them? They were expected to implement the democratic changes to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. As we witnessed in 2023, Zanu PF blatantly rigged those elections, and they got away with it. This is 23 years since the launch of the MDC. Anyone with half a brain who understood why the people had risked livelihoods, their lives, and limbs to elect the MDC-CCC opposition would ask, why is it that we still have the problem? Why is it the opposition have failed to implement those reforms? And that is the question we're asking here. When Nelson Chamisa and company failed to implement reforms during the GNU, they were failing the people of Zimbabwe. We had risked everything to elect them in that position to implement the reforms. So for anyone to turn around and say, well, okay, they failed to keep their promise to implement reforms, shrug their shoulders as if it's nothing. Only somebody who doesn't understand what we're talking about here would do that. Because if you accept that MDC-CCC sold out, then you must also accept that the nation is back to what we were in the late 1990s, stuck with a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical regime that is dragging the nation deeper and deeper into the abyss. The option of accepting, resigning ourselves to that fate is unthinkable and should be unthinkable. So let me restate again clearly. The MDC-CCC leaders were elected for one primary principal purpose: to implement the democratic reforms to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. After 26 years and counting on the political stage, Zanu PF is still able to blatantly rig the elections, and not only that, to get away with it because the opposition, MDC, are participating in those flawed elections, lying to people that they've plugged the vote rigging loopholes to encourage them to participate, knowing fully well that participating would only give Zanu PF legitimacy. That speaks volumes of the opposition we have in the country. And that anyone should fail to understand the full import of that beggars belief. Chamisa's lying about plugging vote rigging loopholes has far-reaching implications and consequences than Mnangagwa's lies. It means Zimbabwe has resigned itself to the Zanu PF dictatorship and the consequences thereof. That's what it means. That is why Chamisa's betrayal must be treated with greater urgency than that of Zanu PF. Because if Chamisa cannot be trusted to dismantle the Zanu PF dictatorship, we must find somebody who can, or we are stuck with the dictatorship. Because I repeat, Zanu PF will never dismantle the dictatorship. Zanu PF will never reform itself out of power. Think about it. Thank you. Have a good evening.